Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, wherever you are in the world. Welcome, welcome, welcome.
Welcome, everyone.
My name is Maurizio Benazzo,
My name is Aya Benazzo.
and we are speaking to you from the coast of Milwaukee and southern Pomo unceded territory, currently known as Sebastopol, California.
So thank you for joining us today. We're stepping into not an easy territory, a vast territory, and we're not here to resolve anything, but to sit together, to reflect, to feel together. And we're not going to cover all the layers of this deep conversation, but we're going to begin and then listen where it's going to take us next. So just very quickly, a couple of logistics.
Yes, regarding the flow of the day, we will open with the prayer and intention with Pat McCabe, Woman Stand Shining, followed by Bayo Akomolafe and Tara Brack. Afterward, we'll begin the conversation for about an hour, followed by a time for Q&As, about 30 minutes. Please type your questions succinctly, if you say that in succinctly, I never heard that word much, chart into the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen, and we will read the question.
And then immediately after this conversation ends, we invite you to stay for another hour, if you can, for an integration session led by our dear friend and therapist and trauma integration therapists who will lead us into breakout sessions where we can actually share more and reflect together. So if you can, please stay. That will be from 12:40 to 1:40 Pacific time.
Yeah, with Gail Brenner.
Gail Brenner. So, Pat McCabe,
Pat.
welcome. Take us from here.
Thank you, Zaya, Maurizio, to all our panelists and all who have came to join us for this obviously a conversation that is close to the heart, close to the soul. So many people have wanted to participate here. So I want to open with an invocation and a calling. Maybe we can all just take a breath together and inhale and exhale. And one more time, inhale and exhale. So Wakantanka, Tunkashila, Oshimaka, Shema, Shiche, holy people all around. It's me, Wiyakpa, Naji Ween, coming before you on this holy day on Petukile. I want to say thank you to all the life, all of our relations, the flying ones, swimming ones, creepy crawling ones, four-legged ones, the stone people, the standing nation, the trees, the waters, the mountains, all of the life. We're joined together as one family of life here. So I ask our elders to take a good look and see that the five-fingered ones have come together to consider ourselves, to have a look at ourselves, to consider who we are, where we are, how it is. Again, we need your eldership. We need your input. We need your help in understanding how do we uphold our part of this sacred hoop of life. This honor that we have been given to walk on this beautiful Mother Earth. Such a privilege. They say so many all throughout the multiverse and in all dimensions look this way. Wow. They look this way and they are looking to see, and wondering if they might have this opportunity to place their feet on this Mother Earth, to be in this body on this Mother Earth, to experience and have this relationship to our Mother Earth in this material realm. And as the human being, we've been placed here with a gift to give. My grandmother says that there's much in the universe that depends upon the human being. What is that gift? I don't know all of the gift that we have, but one of the gifts that I've been told and that I experience myself is that we have this gift of this heart. We have this gift of this feeling. We have this gift of perception through our emotional body. And that place is so tender and so sensitive. So tender and so sensitive. Designed to respond to all of the beauty around us. To be able to take in that beauty, to be fed by it, and to move into exaltation. That is one of our highest possibilities here. And I'm going to say that from my perspective, holy people, holy helpers, even our divine helpers, even our ancestors who've achieved true ancestorhood from wherever we come from whatever our lineage is, we reach out to you because there has been so much illusion, delusion, and deception placed before us for so long, for a very, very long time, that it's hard for us to be able to use our gifts of discernment, intuition, sensibilities to understand how to be that sensitive gifter of the sensation of feeling here on this Mother Earth. So today we're talking about an area that is so tender, which is that you, I believe, all of this larger community of life and the spiritual community is trying to find their way into our circle of human beings, from the north to the south, from the east to the west. I feel like you're trying to get through to us, to help us, to guide us, to keep us free from those illusions, delusions, and deceptions. And so you give some of us inspiration. You give some of us a voice. We hear you. We move you. We move you here into this place. And that is a sacred, sacred gift that all human beings throughout time have recognized, that there are people in their community who have been called on in that way to bring that gift. And yet at this time, because of so much pain and suffering, trauma we call it, distortions have moved in to these places as well, in so many places. And so we are looking for wisdom. We're looking for discernment. We're looking for understanding about how to hold ourselves when pain, suffering, distortion come into that sacred, 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 sacred place of where you come in to meet us, where you come in to have input and guide us through the voices, through the hearts, through the minds, through the bodies of your sons and daughters. So I ask that you be with us and see that we are looking to find our way to uphold the deep honor of being human being, the deep honor of being able to bear our gift to future generations, the 7 generations to come, not only of the human beings, but of all the life. How can we be that omnibeneficent presence, that one that is a benefit and blessing to all? So in that way, we call out to you, we reach out to you, all of our help from life, light, and love. Show us that way and guide and direct this conversation. We make a place for you here, for you to speak as well. So I open with these words for all my relations.
I offer prayer, a speculative prayer of some sort. And I offer these words as a libation at this burning threshold. Today I was thinking about the word ashe. You might have heard it somewhere. My people, the Yoruba people from West Africa, are fond of saying ashe. We say it all the time. We don't say it as much as we used to. When I grew up in Nigeria, I heard the word ashe as amen, which is more conclusive,
and more definitive and more precise. It's a full stop. But long before Asher became Amen, long before the slave ships came with their full stops and conclusions, Asher was more than Amen. It was invitation. It was the fungal, mycelial, ecological grace of porosity. It was the world in its ravenous becoming. It was rivers flowing into each other. It was never the one thing. It was a prior generosity, a space of abundance. It was grace before it became a conclusion. It was grace before we rushed to a solution. It was grace before we rushed to innocence. It was grace before the fires came. It was grace after the fires left. And so we are in a time of the loss of innocence. A loss so severe that even this gathering is not immune from the fires that are burning. We are not removed from it. And yet we gather in the fires because there is grace, because there is Asher here as well. And when things erupt, and when we don't know what to do, and when we're not so sure where to go, that is the point where Asher makes its voice heard. And so I speak Asher to our gathering, not because we know the way, because we know what we're doing exactly, but because in these moments, when everything we can say, all the modalities we can concoct to meet these times, everything we can do still feels part of the trouble, then we need something different. And so I speak with you, Asher. I say Asher to our gathering. May our road be rough. Is a blessing from my country, which isn't a curse. It isn't to say that may there be trouble. It's that when we meet trouble, may the ancestors meet us too. May we find treasures in the most surprising places, miracles where we find the ordinary, brothers and sisters and siblings where we thought there was no one else. May we find each other in beautiful and surprising ways. Asher, Asher, Asher. Sister Tara.
Oh, thank you. Really a deep bow. I feel lifted, Pat, by your invocation and by this Ashe. And really a bow to each for bringing your good hearts and being part of this. I thought I'd just take a few moments together just to invite us, if we will, if your eyes are open, you might lower your gaze or close your eyes. And as Pat had us do right at the beginning, again, feel this life breath that's here. You might take a long, deep in-breath, really filling the chest and the lungs. Let's do this simple, universal process of breathing together, maybe holding for a few moments. And then a slow out-breath, slow enough so you can feel the sensations of release. And again, a nice, full, deep in-breath, breathing in together. Hold for a moment and sense that space of holding, the profound presence in it. And then that long release, letting go, letting go. And one more time, nice deep in-breath. Hold. And with the out-breath, letting your body soften some, releasing, letting go. And as the breath resumes in its natural rhythm, just notice the quality of presence here. All grace arises out of presence. Listening to and feeling the moment, You might bring an intimate attention to your heart. And just notice whatever's here. Anything stirred up by what we're here to explore. Whatever's here is welcome. You might even offer some gesture of kindness to your own heart. Go ahead, just some small gesture. You can touch your heart with your hand tenderly. Some kindness, and notice what happens with a gesture of care. And widening the field, sensing this whole gathering, letting your awareness, your care include all of us, widening further and further this collective heart space, including all beings, to all who are suffering in ways we speak about today, and all of us who are part of that suffering, all held in a field of care. And from this place, you might sense your deepest intention in being here, what matters most to you, what you care about, what you wish to serve. And as we open our eyes, carrying this presence, this heart's intention with us into our listening, our speaking, our time together as community. Thank you.
Thank you, Tara, Bio, and Pat. There's a beautiful air. My name is Gabor, by the way. I'll be given the honor of moderating this conversation. There's a beautiful aria by Johann Sebastian Bach, the title of which is Ich habe genug, which means I have enough. And I just want to say that if I got nothing else from this conversation, than what I've already received from the three of you, Ich habe genug, I have enough. Thank you very much. That was very filling. I'd like to acknowledge, first of all, SAND, Science and Non-Duality, Zaya, Maurizio, and their team for facilitating this conversation. And I'd like to acknowledge our sister, Lisa Rankin, whose Substack post some weeks ago sparked the conversations that led to this particular event. So thank you, Lisa, for that. The title is The Architecture of Silence. And I'm just going to go around and ask each of you, the participants, who I won't introduce because you are all introduced at the website. And if I listed all your accomplishments, that would be the end of the program, just for lack of time. So let's begin with, I'd like to start with Pat, actually, in the order that you've already spoken, and then the others. This whole thing was sparked by the Epstein revelations and the many people shocking revelations about Deepak Chopra, who presents as a spiritual teacher and leader, and then writes an email saying, God is a construct, but the squeals of little girls is real. And he has not walked that back. He has not apologized. He has not acknowledged it. He keeps putting out spiritual messages. That's what sparked this conversation. It's not about that particular person, but when we talk about the architecture of silence, Pat, what comes up for you?
Thank you, Gabor. I'm gonna be a little bit brief because I feel like I spoke a lot already, but I'll say that, for myself personally, the there are times when I say about becoming a little bit of a public figure, probably not as much as some of the people on this panel, but nevertheless, and I had this way of saying, I didn't ask for any of this, like I'm not a self-promotion person. I don't have a mailing list. I don't, and nevertheless, here I am. And so I had an interpersonal thing happen with somebody that I got very close to, opened very deeply to, and I let them know that I was really struggling personally because I'd been taking care of my mom during the pandemic, and I was kind of coming into yet another round of needing to do personal healing work, and so I revealed all of that to this person who had so much intelligence and so much recovery work and et cetera. And yet, when things began to fall apart, I got accused of not walking my talk. And so it just really struck me that even if I tried to be a human being with somebody with that level of intelligence, compassion, empathy, for them to kind of like throw it back in my lap that way or my face that way, I feel like, wow, there's something so compelling, even in that one-on-one relationship where that person really wanted me to be something beyond a human being. Like it was really necessary for me to be that. And so I guess for me, I wanted to show up here to be accountable for my own presence, but also to consider, where is all of the accountability in this setup of people's. I feel like we all get set out on this path of wanting to be um, even my grand I'm Dene, I'm Navajo, indigenous person. My grandparents and parents were sent to Dutch Christian Reform missionary residential boarding schools, and they were told you can be anything you want except for who you are as an indigenous person, but ideally you go out and you have fame and fortune. I mean, those are the words, right? And so to 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 have that distortion come, like I was saying in my prayer, when all along there have been people that have been able to access guidance and direction that I feel like we need to bring forward here, and yet it does come through human beings. So I guess I'm here to be accountable to myself and to my presence. I'm here to be supportive of my fellow panelists here, and I also have experienced that sense of deep betrayal, of having placed my heart and my faith in the human being who is also struggling in this power over paradigm. I say we're a traumatized species at this point, and yet there was a part inside of me that really did not want to accept that the people that I looked to, that said, that did, and in our culture we have our medicine people, and they take certain vows. But I think about the priests, who took their vows. And sometimes I wonder, as I was thinking about this moment, and I'll stop here with, you know, were times different when a person took those kind of vows, where the pressure is different, was the epigenetics of trauma didn't have quite that force, or I don't know what, where people could attempt to take on some very serious vows to be that person of service to the people. And I wonder, I don't know. So I'll stop there, and I'll thank you so much, Gabor, for moderating here.
Thank you, Pat. Bio, what comes up for you as your initial response to this conundrum that we're facing, the architecture of silence?
Yes, brother. And thank you, Pat. I wanted to feel this at a level beyond the places that I'm used to approaching such tense matters. And my initial response was fierce, ferocious anger, of course, as you might understand. because I thought about my children, my daughter.
Hmm.
And my public facing self is incredibly polite. I'm nice, but I cannot tell what I would become if any of mine, if those that are dear to me were to be subject to the and my body trembles, and I really tremble. But I wanted to let myself feel into it. I don't know what I would do. And so yes, we are in painful moments. And so it feels important to acknowledge that the pain is real, that gendered violence is real, that arrangements that support the perpetuation of weaponized patriarchy, those arrangements are real. That the ways that bodies get pathologized and used and abused and raped and discarded, all of that is real. And yet I have come here today with two tongues, if you will. And I know in culture, the two-tongued one is usually malicious. You don't have a two-tongued elocutionist speaking truth per se. But I think there are aspects of culture that make space for the trickster.
Mm.
And the trickster doesn't speak truth to power, right? The trickster disturbs the conditions in which truth becomes itself, becomes legible. And so the more popular thing to say is what I just said. I want to say the dangerous thing. And the dangerous thing for me, brother, is that, of course, we're here to address these harms, to look at it, as my dear sister Pat said, to notice them, to feel the trembling in them. We want to draw deeper accountability structures. We want to draw harder lines and boundaries around people who are largely vulnerable to these practices. We want to name the centralized guru. We want to probably decenter the guru. We want to do all these things, and we should do them. The shouldness of these things are not in question. However, I think we face a deeper reckoning. And the deeper reckoning here, despite the virtuousness of the things I've named, is that virtue itself has a hidden career. Virtue itself has a hidden life. And the way that I think about that is the way we rush to the script of when things like this happen. We rush with some frontality to the solution. And my people have struggled with the solutions that have come up in these moments, the solutions, the medicine that's applied, because the medicine that's applied, the virtue that's applied, usually just restores the moral economy that keeps these traditions going. And I wonder about that when the very modality of healing supplants, or rather reinforces, the economy of relations that made that harm possible in the first place. And so this, for me, is the issue, that we must notice how virtue is like frequent flyer miles, right? You can only spend it within the settlement that gave birth to it, right? And the more you spend it, the more you reinforce the mint that produced the harm in the first place. And I wonder really about that, because I know most of us are here and are charged that we have to do this, we have to draw firmer lines, we have to get away from this. But the very attempt to do that only reinforces the very paradigms that produce the harms in the first place. It's like Prometheus tied to the side of a mountain where healing and harm are the same thing. I wonder about that. And I want to do more wondering with you all. Yeah. I'll stop there for now.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Tara, if you go next.
Yeah, I learned so much listening. And so I just have to say I'm taking in, feeling it, just listening to Pat, listening to Bio. Something that keeps coming to me is that humans aren't the enemy. Um, it's not Deepak or Epstein, that it's just part of our conditioning to create these dominance hierarchies where people in power aggress and violate others, and while some of the others may fight, many defer and get silent. It's different forms of freezing or dissociating or avoiding or going along. And we do need to shine a light. We need to shine a light on the patterns, and we need to shine a light, as Bio said, on the very way we're approaching shining a light. So I'm honoring that. And I want to speak just personally for a moment, because I have spent over 50 years in spiritual communities, and I've been in different roles. And I want to just say a little about what I've learned from them, because the first community for 10 years was 3HO with Yogi Bhajan. Many have heard of cult group. I was there. There's many documentaries now that talk about how abusive it was with the rape and sexual violation of very young women, girls. And I knew very closely the number 2 person in the cult who ended up being charged with drug smuggling. So here I was there for 10 years. So that asks the question, how is that possible? There were many rounds that I would speak up because I always felt something off. And each time I'd be, shot down or reported to higher ups, or, you're betraying our wonderful teacher. There must be something wrong with you, with your ego. But again, I stayed. I had doubts from the get-go, and I stayed. So I want to say why, because it shines a light on the patterns in hierarchical systems, especially in spiritual communities. I loved the practices. I felt expanded, inspired by practices, but that got conflated with the teacher in the community. That happens a lot. We just need to know that. I felt identified and belonging to community, human connection. I didn't want to lose it. I didn't want to be ostracized. I felt confused because I knew I was a flawed human, so I was caught in self-doubt. Could I be right about this larger picture? So I tried to practice harder, to just surrender more, really, to find that inner well-being. And this too, spiritual bypass, where the teachings are framed in a certain way that gets individually focused, so we don't really look at the larger system we're a part of. But then something happened that broke it all open for me, which was I had had a miscarriage. I was 32. And I was in a gathering of probably 300 people. And it was 2 days after the miscarriage, and Yogi Bhajan had me stand up in front of everybody. And he told me that, in very crude terms, I was glad to have sex with my husband, but I didn't want the child. My ego never wanted to have a child. I was way too ambitious. I didn't care. My heart didn't care. And I want to say that, as painful as that moment was, incredibly shaming and so on, what was worse was what happened afterwards, which is that I had a lot of friends in this gathering. We were together at a month-long event. Only one person came up. She gave me a silent hug. She didn't say anything. Nobody else acknowledged what happened. And this, too, is what goes on in communities of silence, is that there's this kind of understanding that the leader, the guru, is always right, and then people are caught in their egos, and you don't want to take a chance of stretching. Now, I just want to take in the last few moments here, I want to say that I have spent 4 times as long in my life as a white person in positions of clear leadership in spiritual organizations. So how can I be accountable here? Because over and over, I've had to see my blind spots. And I want to say that was often with the help of my friends of color and with diversity groups. The ways I wasn't seeing the trauma of racism, the ways I could be controlling, entitled, insensitive. I'm not saying this as much as confession as it's just been a life path to see how conditioned I have been by patriarchal hierarchies, by white supremacy. And I'm sharing because it's humbling and because every one of us is conditioned by these systems. And to a degree, we've reacted. And if we haven't paid deep attention, we're in a trance. We're identified. So for me, this inquiry that we're in is so crucial. Can we look at our own social positions and communities with real honesty, with curiosity, with humility? You know, what might I not be seeing that's helping to perpetuate systemic harm? And then under that, what is love asking? What's the courageous response? And one last thing, and this is really important. If we inquire alone, we're in a limited cocoon of our own brain. Plus, we tend to take it personally. We shame ourselves or whatever. We need to do it together. We need to do it together because collectively we can be much wiser and more compassionate and stepping out of a trance that keeps getting perpetuated through human history. And that's a lot of words. Thank you.
Thank you, Tara. V, I'd like to turn to you next because my brother Bayo talked about the weaponization of patriarchy or weaponized patriarchy. So much of your life work has been directly to confront that weaponized patriarchy and to support and help empower the targets of it. So what comes up for you in this context?
Wow. Well, I'm reeling from the story that Tara told, so I just need to take a moment because my heart, I just want to cry. Thank you for sharing that. And I'm very moved by Bio, I'm very moved by Pat, and just very moved by this whole experience because Bio was talking about rage and anger at some point, and I have plenty of that, you know, but what I have a lot of is grief, you know, and I think when I'm in the context of community, I can feel my grief, you know, it gives me a safeness. I've been thinking so much, and I want to say for all of those who think, what is she doing here? She's not a spiritual leader. I come from, you know, I love spirit and I am in spirit, but I also, my orientation here is that my own experience of being raped and beaten regularly by my father led me to create an organization, a movement, V-Day and 1 Billion Rising. And I've been working for 30 years looking at violence against women and all my siblings and why and what, and every day of my life, I've been trying to understand it literally 12 hours a day. It never stops. And I want to say for all the survivors on this call, just want to take a moment because I think we're at a moment of revelation, but revelation is painful. And I know survivors because I get many, many letters a day, what the Epstein files have brought up. But also I want to say this is not particular to the spiritual community. We only have to look at what happened with Cesar Chavez this week in the revelations in the Times of the children he raped and Dolores Huerta, who had 2 babies from those rapes. It's in our movements, political movements, it's in arts, patriarchy is ripe everywhere. And that system of oppression, that system of hierarchy, that system of daddy, guru, movement leader at the top can do no wrong is vast and everywhere. I want to share 2 stories because I've been thinking a lot about sacrifice. I feel, you know, and I just want to say one thing before that. When we say what's the architecture of silence, particularly in America, rape is baked into every notion of our history, whether it was indigenous people who were raped by the settlers, whether it was the schools that Indian children were sent to, where they were raped regularly, whether it was slavery, where the millions of women who were raped during slavery, and their slave owners were entitled to that rape. It should not be surprising that we have arrived here when it is literally in the DNA of who we are, as a people, as a nation, as a whatever we want to call it. But I want to share this story. When I was in the middle of my recovery, I went and I met my mother, and it was a very troubling time, and it was very scary. And I sat face to face with her on a couch, and I looked into her eyes, and I told her what my father had done to me. And the act of doing that was decimating my mother's narrative, her conscious narrative about my father, right? I saw the collapse of the person, the human she had loved for many, many years. And it was very difficult. And for weeks, she would call me, sometimes saying strange things like, what if your father meets me in the next world and I believe you and I didn't believe him? And I would say, don't worry, I got this for you. And then one day she called me up and she said, I figured it out. I sacrificed you. And I said, what? She said, I sacrificed you. I was a young woman. I had no skills. I had 3 children. I had nowhere to go. And I realized I gave you up as my sacrifice. It was a chilling thing to hear, but I always knew it was true. I always knew it was true. And I think sometimes, and then I just want to say a parallel story. I was in group therapy and individual therapy with a therapist years later. And in the middle of my recovery around what my father had done to me, I was leaving the session and my therapist grabbed me and he made out with me. And it horrified me. And I wrote a letter to everyone in my group and I said, I'm leaving therapy. And not one of them responded and not one of them believed me. And so I was forced to really chart a new path. And I think this notion that patriarchy demands in so many respects, but I'm going to speak to women and I'm going to speak to all women when I say women, the sacrifice of us, like it will get to us later. Our movements, like Dolores Huerta say in her interview, I didn't tell because I didn't want to ruin the movement. I didn't tell in my family because I didn't want to destroy the family. I didn't tell here. But meanwhile, I was being sacrificed to that. And I feel that we have to look at the conditions that keep people sacrificing, whether it's poverty or oppression or fear, and we have to revamp those conditions so that people feel they can tell the truth. And I want to say in our political movements, in the spiritual community, we have no viable systems of accountability. We have no way of allowing people to report. We have no way of making people feel safe to report. And I think that is critical. It is critical. And we have no way, in getting back to Bio's point, of allowing men who have been brought up in patriarchy, whose souls have been decimated by patriarchy, to go through a process of reparation and apology in our communities where they get to be changed within our shared care and our shared love. And I think that is absolutely critical. And I want to talk more later about apology. And then the last thing I want to say is that I feel that every time, like, we speak out, every time we confront, every time we say the truth, whether it's on Gaza, where I think many of us who were open about it from the very beginning and we're speaking out, we lost community, we lost jobs, it feels like we're going to lose something. It feels like we're going to not be welcome. We're not going to belong. We're not going to be a part of. But in fact, every time we speak out, we enlarge another community, which is a community that is really willing to seek the truth. And I just want to say that is the kind of fierce warriorness of speaking out and saying what has happened to us. And I think it is, it is the thing that sets us free.
Thank you, V. What is so clear so far is how there's no separation between the systemic and the personal. Matthew, I'll turn to you next. Bio talked about speaking truth to power. Sometimes people thank me for speaking truth to power, but my response is I don't speak truth to power because power doesn't listen. It's not a question of speaking truth to power. It's a question of speaking truth about power. And you've been doing that, both in the spiritual communities and more broadly politically. And Bai also mentioned how the modality of healing becomes another way to reinforce the harm, and you've certainly addressed that issue as well. So, would you just speak?
Well, thank you, everybody. I think I should probably say just a few personal things about myself, because I think I'm probably lesser known, maybe, but I was brought up Catholic. I have a clerical abuse history in my family that has impacted my life, and that's very motivational. For 6 years in my late 20s, I was ensnared in two different high demand groups or cults. And I've done journalism on spiritual abuse for about 10 years since, and more recently on how spirituality is used for political extremism. But at this point, I'm realizing that a sort of core drive that I have is to help nurture spiritual culture as a support for resisting rising fascism and genocide. And I think spirituality offers us co and self regulation. It offers prophetic inspiration for worlds we cannot see, and the opportunity to practice together for a post capitalist world, which is going to be hard, whether it happens by collapse or revolution. So, I mean, to my eye, this terrible, predictable history of patriarchal exploitation that we're discussing today is like the primary obstacle to spiritualities that want to fulfill their social potential. And I have to say that part of figuring this out, I was listening to the invocations at the beginning, and I'm really grateful for that. I'm not generally in spaces like this that often anymore. And people like me who do nonstop cultural criticism and political analysis can certainly use more of that, because I think we always have to ask ourselves, like, what is this discourse and content for? Is it making us cynical? Is it making us paranoid? Is it showing us possibilities? And so it also means that I want to kind of point out my odd status here on this panel as a journalist and a critic, because when we're facing the music expressed by the opening line that Zaya used in the program description to describe this moment, you know, she wrote that something is cracking open in spiritual culture. And we're talking about breaking silence, not only about abuse in communities, but also the silence that commodified spiritualities protect around social harms like rising fascism and genocide. It takes a lot of skills. And that's why I think it's really good to have a doctor, a Yoruba non-dualist, a Dene leader, a playwright, a lifelong meditator. We also need researchers, journalists, social workers, human rights lawyers, and people who evaluate how a spiritual culture evolves out of political conditions. Pat wondered aloud, I thought this was really interesting, about whether we've changed. Is something in our evolution, has something been thrown off where previously we might have been able to deeply commit to something? I'm not sure about the anthropology there, but I do think that the capitalist incentives that we see in commodified spirituality are central to Chopra's story and to the hyper-individualism of the spirituality that he wound up selling, which by its very nature really discourages people from talking about what's happening to each other or talking about their own spiritual development as though it's a cooperative effort. So I would also suggest, though, that, you know, there has been an almost allergic exclusion of analysis and scholarship from within new spiritual and wellness cultures. And that's part of why we're here today. But the good news is, and I have more to say later, is that there has been a ton of progress. V, I would absolutely agree with you that we don't have widespread practices and systems for accountability or for appealing for help. Largely that is true. I am happy to report, though, that I've provided a pretty extensive bibliography for Zaya and Maurizio to share with the entire gathering. And it shows that over the last 10 or 15 years, there's a fair amount of scholarship and research on communities that have actually made good efforts bringing in as many resources as they can to sorting out these problems of domination, charismatic control, lack of accountability. And if I'll just shout out to my friend and colleague Anne Glegg and everybody who works with her, and Theodora Wildcroft in the yoga world. These are people who have been addressing this problem of how do survivors within spiritual communities who have these histories of abuse, how do they come forward? Not only come forward, but how does their experience shape the ethics of how the organization is going to go forward? So I just want to throw a little bit of bright news into the mix. And I just would finish by saying for now that all of that work is best when it happens, when people can feel that seeking relief from spirituality is not necessarily the same as being able to stand a little bit outside and think critically about how spiritual communities are organized. Like those are two different skills. They're two different things. And also, this material works better when we just listen and platform and center survivors. So I'll just leave it there for now.
Thank you all, and thank you, Matthew. Henceforth, I'll just be asking questions, and those of the panelists that are moved to respond, please just raise your hand rather than just keep going around. It's astonishing. So far, I've asked one question, and we're almost done with the hour, which speaks to the depth and the gravitas of what we're addressing here. So probably we're going to skew the timelines a little bit. I have a question. I've been struck over the years by how it's almost de rigueur in spiritual communities for abuse to take place. So that there's been teachers, great teachers, or teachers that have been considered great, and have had many followers who've planted many seeds of spiritual endeavor, who then turn out to be abusers. And I could list a whole bunch of names in the Buddhist world, in the yoga world, in the Hindu world, let alone the Christian world, and as we're finding out now in the Jewish Orthodox world as well. So here's the question. Is it possible for people to transmit great spiritual truths and yet be so antithetical to their truths in their behavior? Or are they just charlatans? How do we understand this capacity to inspire and teach so many and be a merciless abuser at the same time, which we see everywhere? So are they transmitting truths, or are they just parroting something and be nowhere near in their hearts to what they're actually teaching? Now, who would like to address that one? Pat, please.
Okay, Pat. Pat, you go. I'll creep up after you.
Okay, thanks, Bio. Well, so this was another piece that I was coming into this discussion with, which is, what is this phenomenon of the double life that that we see, and for myself, I will say that, um, like I said, my grandparents, my parents coming out of residential boarding school, in which they are told, and this is around the clock, it's not just for part of the day, it's 24/7. These people raising them have access to them, and they're being told in every way, verbally, with looks, in every way, everything about you is wrong. Every single thing about you is wrong, and it has to be corrected, and you have to change it. And so when I think about that, and then I think about, then what the alternative is given to them, which is that you are to, but there's a way out. There's the American dream. And, so they really pitched going to school. Nobody can take that from you, and this is something that Bio and I share in common a little bit, talking about that. And so what I witnessed in that circumstance was huge outward achievement in the world. And part of that was to say, listen, suckers, watch what I can do. Not only am I human, which also was sort of questionable. Not only do I have intelligence, but I can beat you at your own game. Right? So there was this huge drive to do that. But meanwhile, behind closed doors, there was this massive implosion going on and self-destruction. And that's been something that has been extremely difficult for me to put together in my own personal trauma healing work. And even for myself, I've gone through periods where I'm begging God and begging, the helpers, I do not want to be someone who lives a double life. How do I not live a double life? How do I come into coherence here? Now, I got sent to an East Coast prep school, very prestigious academic situation. But I realized there that it was the same deal. You take the best and the brightest, and you make sure you capture them, and you put them in this indoctrination system, where you're also making sure that they're only thinking in certain ways and moving in certain ways. And you know what? Those kids were imploding also. So there is this what I call modern world paradigm, or the power over paradigm, in which you must have power over another in order to have what you need. And I say, in that paradigm, cooperation, collaboration, it is antithetical to what makes us most human. It is antithetical actually to Earth paradigm, which is only about relationship. Earth is all about interrelatedness, interconnectedness, interdependence. Anything that any organism does on this earth affects every other being. That is as relational as it gets. So to be pressed so hard into these individualistic and achieving ways, that's what I just keep thinking about, kind of drives us into this double world place. So it's not a direct answer to your question, Gabor, but I just wanted to get that out because that's been swimming around for me since I knew we were going to have this conversation. And I'll turn it over to Bio.
Thank you. So, Bio, can deep truth emanate from flawed sources, or is it all polluted?
Yes, brother. And I was just thinking when my dear sister Pat was speaking about doubleness and the the aesthetic or the notion of duplicity here. How Du Bois, who has a new statue here in Great Barrington, Mama V, I'm sure you've seen his beautiful statue just alone by a bench somewhere. Yeah, how he spoke about the double consciousness, and I won't get into the weeds of that except to say that especially Black folks in the United States have a sort of vision of things that yearns for a noticing of you might, in conversational terms, call it the whole, right? How it's not this or that. Because if you're beaten constantly, if you get blows on your face, things start to get blurry, right? And so the ontological precision with which we demarcate this individual versus this individual, or the way modernity keeps on rushing back to what I call the switch, charlatan or authentic person, good or bad person. You know, oh, let's push the switch all the way up there so that we don't have any of this down there. We keep doing that, right? And modernity habituates us to continually see the world and parse it that way. Right? Something happened at the BAFTAs. I've been telling this story at the BAFTAs recently. Mamvi, I thought we had a conversation about this. I'm not sure on the phone.
No, we didn't. We
Um,
did telepathy.
okay, we did. I mean, we have a telepathic entanglement here. The story is probably known across culture right now. A man suffering from Tourette's called two brothers on the stage, Michael B. Jordan and I forget the Lindo, I think is his name.
Delroy Lindo.
Yes, Delroy Lindo called them the N-word, right? And over and over and over again. And what was interesting to me, of course, we can read all about it if you don't know that this happened recently. What was vastly interesting to me wasn't just that happened, it was how we responded to it. Because siblings and Black folks and people, many of them wrote and said, well, he's obviously a racist because this came from inside of him. He's racist. And activists who are working with Tourette's and other disabilities also stood up and said, no, it didn't come from him. He's excusable. He's innocent, right? Now, notice how the switch comes again. It's either you're to blame or you're not to blame. The third maybe other invitation that has been simmering in indigenous cultures, in Black studies, in feminist eco-criticisms for so long now is we're missing the point by focusing on the point, that clarity obscures too much. The idea that we can divide the world that way is making us lose sight of the fact that the accommodation speaks. It's the moral economy. It's the way our bodies are held. It's the arrangement, right? This is post-humanist. This is more than just the human in charge. So there is a sense in which we can say that that spiritual cultures can produce vulnerability, and vulnerability somehow feels tangentially related and a necessary ingredient for transformation. But that same ingredient lends itself to abuse. So the very same accommodation that offers genuine experiences will also offer this other terrifying experience. It's our response to it that gets the moral economy either reinforced or open to other possibilities.
Thank you, Brother Bayo and Pat, Sister Pat. Let's talk about silence.
Wait, Matthew has his hand up.
Sorry?
Matthew has his hand up.
Oh, okay. Sorry, Matthew, go ahead. Your sound is not on.
Yes, I just turned it back on. I would just like to add to these great commentaries that I think, Gabor, your question is getting at the enigma of charisma, right? Can brilliant things come from a damaged place or from a flawed place? Are they charlatans or wounded geniuses and so on? And I think that that is a very attractive question for those of us who are interested in psychology. Because I think we ask it of ourselves, like, what are our own splits, right? Like, what's the difference between our public and private lives? But in my particular field of writing and study, what I've seen over and over again is that charismatic leaders who become abusive are in full symbiosis with their inner circles. And I'll give just a couple of examples. So there's no doubt that Chogyam Trungpa contributed some kind of amazing ideas to the development of global Buddhism. So Cutting Through Spiritual Materialism is a very famous and well-regarded book. But where did it come from, right? I think people think of him as being some sort of, epic genius or something. And he was very interesting for sure. But that actual book came out of a co-writing session with two of his senior students in a cottage in northern England one winter. It was months at a time. And this was during a period like, through most of his life, he was a daily, alcohol abuser, right? And I think that the stories, when I was researching Shambhala abuses for an investigation, the stories that would come out consistently would be that, we had to take care of him while he was in this particular state. And sometimes he would say these incredible things, right? He would be really inebriated. And then he would come back and he would say, I just visited with the Rigdan kings, in a Tibetan heaven. And while this doesn't necessarily point to charlatanism, what I want to point out is that the actual sort of goodness or the value of what comes out of that encounter is as often the creativity, the warmth, the generosity, the excitedness of the actual student and the students together. And I don't know if this resonates with you, Tara, but I mean, I've heard similar stories about Yogi Bhajan, that it's really the people who do the supportive work in the inner circle who might be ensnared there because there's maybe disorganized attachment patterns have grown up amidst the abusiveness. There's an incredible amount of work that the group itself does to sort of mirror the specialness of the leader back to them. So I really look at this question dialectically. It's not really a mystery to me, like how can such a broken person contribute such wisdom? It's more like, what did that culture need, and who ended up on top as kind of like a representative? Because when it comes down to it, the actual content of the leader or the expert, it's often really questionable as to how much is really theirs. So I really look at that as a group phenomenon. And if that's true, then it's really the sort of horizontal relationships between the people in the group that have to be scrutinized just as much as the vertical relationships between the leader and the follower.
Interesting. Thank you. V, please.
I just want to talk a little bit about privilege and power, because to me, if we look at the Epstein files, the amount of money, power, extreme money, extreme power in the hands of very few people does very damaging things, particularly in a state of extreme patriarchy, right? We know that. I don't know if you've all been following the Pellico trial, but I'm obsessed with it. And I've just finished listening to her book. You have to listen by Emma Thompson because it's amazing. But they talk about splitting, married to a man for 50 years who was drugging her for 10 years and inviting hundreds of men to rape her all the time. There were 200 gang rapes of her husband of 50 years, right? I mean, the story is one of those stories, and there's an amazing book called Living with Men by Manon Garcia, where she's actually saying in that book, how do we live with men? Because all of these men were invited, all of these men went willingly, all of these men knew she was drugged, all of these men raped her, all different sizes, shapes, ethnic groups, ages, and when I read that, I think, what is privilege? What is power? They all believed that he essentially owned his wife and he could make the decisions about who raped her. In the court, they said things like this. So I look at power structures and I look at privilege because I think it's a large part. And I think the guruization of people, the making people believe, and I so agree with what you're talking about, Matthew. It's like, I'm sorry, in so many gurus' work, there are so many women, Black people, and people of color behind what has made that person rise to power. But the elevation of someone to that kind of adoration, to that kind of everything you say is amazing, everything you say is the truth, everything is just inherently wrong. It's inherently patriarchal. And if we do not start moving towards shared leadership empowered communities, a way where we are all part. I want to just talk about Minnesota, because Minnesota to me is the new model. There are no heroes there. There's not one name you know, but everybody in that community made that happen. And one of the beautiful things about it is they all kept each other in check. They all kept each other moving forward. They all inspired each other. They all did something else. And that to me is a more feminist, a more, it's just the new model we have to be moving towards. I just think Tina Turner said it best. We don't need another hero. We need community. We need people. We need us. We need shared leadership. And that doesn't mean we don't need leaders and people to step forward this moment, and I step forward this moment, and you step forward that moment. But if Minnesota is teaching us anything, it's what it works when there's not one person to identify, because they can't take that person out, but it's also, we're all empowered in that story. And I think, yeah, leave it there.
Thank you. Tara, please. But Tara, before you speak.
I'm aware that we're going in a lot of directions. Gabor, why don't you go ahead with the next question, and I'll find a way to say whatever I want to say.
No, the question was going to be to you, actually. So let me
offer that, and I'll weave in a response. What were you going to add?
I just tell you something that comes up in my ADD mind, all these associations and this guru syndrome. I'm reminded of the movie The Life of Brian, the Monty Python movie, where Brian is supposed to be the Messiah, and these people keep insisting that he's the Messiah, and he keeps insisting that I'm not the Messiah. And finally he says, okay, I am the Messiah, now fuck off. And his followers say, how shall we fuck off, my lord? You know? Anyway, the question, Tara, has to do with silence. And V talked about silence around Gaza. Now, a dozen Israeli Jewish scholars of Holocaust have declared that what Israel has done in Gaza is genocide. These are Jewish Israeli scholars. And yet in the spiritual world, in the Buddhist world, in the Christian world, in the Jewish spiritual world, and there's been not complete, but almost deathly silence, literally deathly silence around a genocide we've been watching online. More specifically to this conversation, and Israeli healers are begging the world to speak out, but there's still this silence. In the spiritual world, we've been mentioning Chögyam Trungpa and the Shambhala community, and we don't need to say more about Trungpa Rinpoche, but there's the phenomenon of Pema Chodron, who is his close follower, an acolyte, and a teacher in her own right, who has been absolutely silent. So what I was going to put to you is, what is the architecture of silence that is a scaffolding for so much that happens, either in general in the world or in the spiritual world? Now, if your answer, I hope you don't mind my putting that question to you.
No, I don't mind. It feels like it's right at the center of so many people's attention right now. And I'm involved with a number of Israeli and Palestinian activists, and I'm often asked about the silence of Buddhist teachers. And what happens often in spiritual communities, and counts for part of it, is that it's very individualistic. In other words, basically the idea is that the teachings are focusing on inner freedom, not social conditions. And when I speak out, which I often do, I get emails all the time saying, stay in your lane.
Mm-hmm.
The spirituality, it doesn't have to do with collective well-being. Compassion matters, but it's compartmentalized. It's for everyone. So what that means is we don't take a response to the particulars, because then you have to list all the particulars. And for many Buddhist teachers, the priority is create a welcoming space for all. If you take a position, it's going to exclude and alienate. I'm just listing kind of, these are the reasons that for the quiet, the fear of angering and losing students and wanting to avoid conflict. And I can say from my own experience, from talks and articles and interviews, I have gotten swamped by letters from Jewish friends and Jewish people I don't know, saying things like that I'm a Nazi. My background's Jewish. I'm a Nazi betraying my people. But even more of the communications has been grief. Like, I took refuge with you for 15 years, and now I feel like betrayed by you. Just this week, my podcast, I have an interview, a two-part interview with Mohsen Mandawi, who's a Palestinian activist. He's a Buddhist, and his whole teaching is about love in action. It's beautiful. I've had so many emails that people feeling deserted. Now are you going to have equal time for the Israelis? So what I'm noticing is there's a confusion between equanimity, having a balanced, open heart mind, and confusing that with neutrality, and not recognizing asymmetry and power. Like, you go into an emergency room and the person with the heart attack and the person with a sprained ankle, well, it's suffering, it's compassion. And then there's a lot of people that feel are afraid of getting it wrong because it's so complex. I don't feel safe to speak into this. Many people are removed from what's going on. They're not seeing the suffering. And then there's all this institutionalized caution, wanting to avoid controversy because we know target of Trump administration, lose your nonprofit status. So I'm learning a lot about how understanding better, and also knowing that in order to speak out and have that courage, we have to do it together. And I want to come back to, right at this moment, what V said about Minneapolis, because I also feel like whether we're talking about outrage against the oppression of ICE, or whether we're talking about outrage towards a genocide or outrage towards sexual abuse, it's all the power of hierarchy, and how do we respond in a way that really is aligned. And I love the term neighborliness. I love some of you may have seen it, this image of thousands of people in Minneapolis. They practiced what they were going to sing, and then they sang in front of a hotel with ICE agents, but it wasn't angry. It was actually an invitation to join us. It was very inclusive. And what I'm getting at here is that there's such a shadow to woke. I want to reclaim woke, to what it really means to be awake, not to as much focus on the individuals who are the examples of aggression and violation as the systems, because we make that mistake over and over and over again. We get waylaid, and we have to call for accountability. But if it's not held in compassion, we're recreating the same system. And one of my friends, Ruth King, says that anger is initiatory. It's not transformational. That humans aren't the enemy, it's the system, and we need to feel the energy of anger and then move to something larger. Because if we dehumanize those that we feel are the aggressors, if our energy has got hatred, again, we just see the same thing. And there's a real fear, and that's the last thing I'll say. There's a real fear that if we open to the realness of what's going on, and we feel the anger, that going to compassion is bypassing a reality. But if we really feel anger deeply, we're going to find, and I think one of my fellow people here, Ken said, we're going to find the grief. That under our anger is a heartbreak and a grief. And if we can feel that caring and act from that, that's the beginning of repair. It's the way one of my friends describes as a strong back, where we absolutely go for naming the truth of what's happening. And we have the courage to say, this is a genocide, or this is abuse right now to the vulnerable. We have the courage to say it, to go do everything we need to protect. And our hearts we're soft front. We have to keep caring. There's a saying that vengeance is a lazy form of grief. We need to keep caring to be able to respond to what's going on. So, thank you.
Thank you, Tara. Nothing in me wants to end this conversation. Everything in me wants to keep it going for the next 5 hours. But I'll say one short little thing, and then I'm going to ask another go around. And then I'm afraid, given the time limits, which you've already exceeded, we're going to have to end it, which I think is unfortunate. Something very personal, actually. So, literally, when I was 6 months old, somebody wanted to throw me into an oven. And they nearly did. And I'm imagining a conversation in North America. Hey, somebody in Eastern Europe wants to throw this 6-month-old into an oven. Shall we say something? Oh no, that's too political. That's taking sides. Thank you very much. That's what it comes down to for me personally. And as does the silence around the abuse in the spiritual communities, what's happening with indigenous people from India to Latin America. Sand or Zaimutsio just did a series of films about the travails of indigenous people in the world, and this, and what they're all demanding is the end of silence. So as we go around for the last time, I'm afraid, and I really wish it wasn't, I'll ask each of you just to say what's in your heart about silence or anything else that is a reason for you doing this conversation. Pat, you had your hand up, and Bayu did as well. So let's go in that order, and then we'll take with the others.
Thank you. Thank you to each of you. So I've been asking myself, where is that anger going? It's like, I feel like it's dropping down some kind of hole somewhere and disappearing, but I know it's there. I know it's in there. And so I'll just be transparent that way and say it's a little bit of a mystery to me right now. But I guess, to have the genocide, the attempted genocide that took place on this continent be, never be acknowledged, really. In fact, the only Holocaust that is acknowledged is the one that you were referring to, Gabor. That missing and murdered Indigenous women don't even show up in the statistics. We're not even part of the statistical count of the missing and murdered. I've been actually trying to dismantle and understand the orientation to be someone who survived the attempted genocide, because I don't know what ground is there to stand on. And so for me, I have to go into my spiritual realm. I have to go into the way that the spirit was told to us, and we acknowledge, we've said we've already lost worlds before. So you might hear Indigenous people say this is the sixth world, fifth world, sixth world. So we've had cataclysmic losses. We acknowledge those in humanity, And then we have just a few things that have been said to me about those moments. So it's from that perspective that I sit with all of that that's taking place here. And the breakdown of humanity, really, in some ways, right? And not just in our subject matter, but in so many ways. And so for me, I have to go back to this idea of trickster, which Bio invoked as well. But my orientation is, at this point, having been through many years of deep ceremony and vision questing and more, as I say, trickster is trying to trick us out of giving away this life of our own free will. And it has to be done by our consent, because this is a free will construct. And so how do you do that? You create illusion. That's what I was referring to. Illusion, delusion, and deception, a little bit at a time over a long period of time until there's an enormous amount of confusion. And so for me, I hold fast to this idea that it's actually not human nature what we're witnessing. It's not inherent to us, that we have been preyed upon in so many ways, to cause us to get farther and farther and farther out. And for those who have lost their connection to original instruction that we attribute to indigenous peoples, they're at the mercy of winds and tides and currents that I don't know where else it could land, in a way. But how do you destroy this world? You create separation. You create separations of every kind. And the one that was presented to me as the deepest and most successful and longest running was to create that divide between masculine and feminine, between men's nation and women's nation. And I asked myself, why is that the most effective? And I say, because it can take place in any part of humanity, any race, any religion, any economic level, anything. It can be present there. And if the woman is synonymous with life, if the woman is synonymous with earth, if we want to undo this life, we have to undo her. And so then you have to create illusion and delusion in men's nation for them to misunderstand who they are, what they carry, what their medicine is, and how it is to be brought to this circle. So there's a huge discourse about that. I know we don't have time for that, but I wanted to say that for me, that allows me to continue to have really profound compassion, empathy for humanity, for men's nation, for women's nation, and also causes me to hold tenaciously to upholding the honor of being human being, to being earthling, to being of earth, to being held by her, and also this place that my grandmother spoke of, that we have much that the universe depends upon within the human being. So for me, that's essential right now.
Thank you, Pat. Brother Bio, please.
Yes. So my recollection of this story might be patchy. I'm not sure of all the details of it, but it was another professor, a colleague of mine, Japanese sister, somewhere in Hamburg in 2023, told me a story, folkloric account of, I think, a Japanese a god that had no eyes and no nose and no mouth and no ears, and welcomed other deities and invited, I don't know how the god achieved this, but welcomed the other deities and invited them over for dinner or something like that. And when the gods arrived, they were taken by the hospitality of their host, but they decided to take it one step further. And so they decided, what do we do to really show our thanks, our gratitude? You know what we should do? Let's give this god eyes. And so they grabbed this god and they drilled holes in his head so he could see. And then eventually they gave him nostrils so he could smell. And then they gave him a mouth so he could speak. And just when they were drilling the hole in the ear to get his head to open out into hearing the world, he just exploded. He just disappeared. I'm not sure the story ends that way, but that will have to do for now to make my point, which is a meandering point. It's that, and this is an extremely delicate thing to say. It's that, yes, we must speak out. We must speak out and we must say the things we have to say. We have to write hard. We have to think hard. Like Donna Haraway would say, we have to think about the thoughts that we think. Think the thoughts that think thoughts, right? We have to do all these things. And yet, at the same time, I notice that the conditions of speakability are not static. They're changing, right? There I call it an ableist defaultism that presumes that the only way to be in these moments is with some kind of presence. And this lends itself to the moral policing of righteousness, that if you're not showing up in this way, then you're doing something wrong, then you should be canceled, then this something should happen to you. There's something about that is what I said earlier on. It restores and brings back that virtual and virtuous moral economy. It reinforces it over and over and over again. And probably this is the reason why Black folks speak about fugitivity. It may not always lend itself to speaking out in the ways that we understand it, but sometimes when the default changes, when your speaking becomes part of the establishment. I mean, I should say this real quick, that I teach at Minnesota. I teach at Macalester College. There are literally spaces where students are guaranteed the right to protest. They look like boxes, right? They have been drawn on the ground that if you need to protest against the IDF, you can do it in this box on Tuesdays and Thursdays. It's well-intentioned, but if speaking out is already an act of establishment ventriloquism that only reinstores and marks the ledger, then we have to go deeper than just saying no. Refusal cannot just be saying no. It has to be something that moves beyond surveillance altogether. And not that I have the solution to that. I feel that there isn't a ready-made blueprint or remedy. There's no map for what the world wants to do now. There's only a sitting with and a staying with. So there's a lot more to say, but just wanted to offer that to my siblings.
Thank you, Prayo, and we'll continue as my screen continues. Matthew, if you give us your final, not your final thoughts, but your concluding thoughts for this conversation.
I hope that I can offer a little bit of sunshine, in the sense that in reflecting on Tara's account of the last 40 or 50 years within spiritual communities, I'm really struck by the fact that the struggle is quite individualized, and it's like a constant personal conundrum. Like, how do I go forward and do this? How can I speak openly without offending these people or displacing these people? How can I embody the universality of the teachings that I've been given in a world full of incredible conflict? And I just want to say that I think that the position of the teacher or the figure who is experiencing that is a historical phenomenon that we can kind of locate and see. And I think if we can see it clearly, then we'll have a sense of what not to be fooled by. And so the story that I want to just tell is that the moment that I think of, Tara, when I hear this, the beginning of this individual journey is, in conversation with all of your people, all of your relations, I think of 1969, Swami Satchidananda chanting Om at the beginning of the Woodstock Festival, and how this is a moment of transformation. Now, it turns out that he is abusing his students, right? So this is hidden. It's being sort of buried by the inner circle. The initial complainants are shunned and they move away and nobody ever hears from them again. It takes 20 years or so for the stories to really gain a kind of traction. But the other kind of silencing that's happening that goes along with that kind of structural organizational abuse is that the message on that day from Satchidananda was, he says, I have a quote here. He says, often we hear groups of people shouting, fight for peace, and I still don't understand how they are going to fight and then find peace. Therefore, let us not fight for peace, but let us find peace within ourselves first. Now, this is a classic spiritual teaching, right? And it sounds really, really good. But historically, it also comes at a point that a lot of sociologists call this kind of inward turn towards the self project of the 70s. Because the people on that hill, they were in the civil rights movement, they were anti-Vietnam War protesters, they were exhausted. A lot of things hadn't worked. Leftist politics, progressive politics has been a series of losses for the most part, right? And there was a point at which somebody came along and said, hey, you know what? You can work on yourself, right? You can be the peace, or you can be the change that you want to see in the world. And that is a very wholesome and attractive message. It's also very useful for the person who feels demoralized by having to work on structural change because it's so difficult. And so I just want to, like, I don't know, offer some forgiveness to that history, because as that happens, we also have the birth of a political philosophy, neoliberalism, that focuses on individual achievement and the meritocracy, even in spiritual terms. And so, you know, a lot of the industry that we're talking about as being silent really kind of became depoliticized, not because of psychological flaws, not because people's characters were bad, but because the entire culture was telling itself that, you know, there really isn't any class solidarity. There really isn't any, the history is over. Capitalism is won. And so we don't really, there's nothing really to do but to work on our sort of individual peace. Now, that's a little bit of a generalization. There's other voices in there always, from indigenous leaders and marginalized communities who are saying, no, 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 this is not what spirituality should be. But in general, I would say that one of the reasons that we're here, one of the reasons that Deepak Chopra is a shock, but a predictable shock, is that he really belongs to an industry of spirituality that is focused upon the self. And you can sell endless workshops to work on the self, and people will keep buying them if you jazz them up and, you know, make them unique or whatever. But they will have very little to do with the kinds of structures that I think we all agree have to be in place in order for, you know, us to help each other achieve some kind of equality and spiritual communion and solidarity. So I just wanted to say, like, history has happened. It hasn't just been bad actors. There's been a huge political story that has forced us into a bad position, a lot of us. And I think if we see it clearly, we're going to start choosing differently. I'm pretty sure that has to be what happens if we see it clearly.
Thank you, Matthew. V, someone who has been confronting the structure on the political level, the social level, on the organizational level, certainly on the moral level. What are your final words today?
God, wow. You know, I recently was hired to write a play about mental illness. And before I did that, I interviewed about 25 people in the spiritual and therapy world, and just to see what they felt was the most important thing to be thinking about. And every single one of them told me the same thing, that the medical model has failed. It doesn't work, precisely because of what Matthew's talking about. Like, we can't pretend to fix people if we're not fixing the world that they're living in, right? They're inseparable. It's osmosis, right? And I think for me that what I'm beginning to understand the older I get is that we have to acknowledge the sea that we swim in. We have to acknowledge the way it's poisoned us and the way it's shaped us. And we have to bring that into everything we're doing. The me, the I, whatever that is, for me, is fairly delusional. I don't really even know what that is. I am a part of this. This is my continuum. This is whether we call them systems or oneness or process or whatever, and I can't separate me out from that. And I just want to say one thing for accountability, because I feel very strongly about this. We haven't seen accountability of the genocide towards Native Americans and indigenous people. We haven't seen accountability towards slavery. We haven't seen accountability towards the massive of women in this country who have been 1 out of 3, which is approximately 60 million women in this country who have been violated. I really believe we need a time of accountability and healing, that there has to be justice. There has to be a moment where people come forward and are made to or pushed to or coerced to or loved into taking responsibility for what they've done. And if we look at Me Too, for example, there wasn't one man who was accused who came forward to talk about his reflections, his therapy, what he had done, what he had worked on, how he altered himself since those accusations were made. And I think we have to really look at why we are living in this morally decaying world of the US, particularly, where accountability gets further and further and further away. And as we're looking at the whole system and the whole structure, we have to also be looking at accountability. Deepak Chopra doesn't get off saying that. That's not enough. That's not enough. And I think we have to ask people to go deeper into their self-reflections and becoming aware of why that would be harmful and why people are upset about that, that's really a critical part of this process. In the same way, we have to look at our history and have a period of time where we reflect on how this country began and how that beginning has led us here. Leave it at that.
Thank you, V. And Tara, you have the last sharing here.
Yeah, thank you. I'm feeling the energy, V, and I'm about accountability. And what has occurred to me when I look through at least recent history, the only time I see it in small places as transformational healing is when it's in community and it's done with compassion.
Yep.
And I want to go back to Pat, because I was really struck by, really kind of a reality the way you are kind of a sharing on the nature of reality is relational. And I feel like every one of us in different language, and some the same, is talking about severed belonging. How we're in this delusional world, we're cut off from earth, from each other, from spirit, going around in that individual I that Matthew was talking a lot about. And that I also find that as I'm here with you, something in me gets less me-ish and feels larger because there's the power's in the relational field. What happens for me is I start being more sensitive, this instrument of sensitivity of heart. Again, I think that was Pat that you talked about, to the goodness. There's an intrinsic goodness of spirit, of light, of love that is coming through in the caring that I'm feeling. And I'm feeling into the field that there's caring. And I really trust that. And now I'm really saying what carries me, which is trusting in that intrinsic goodness, spirit, that there's a cherishing to life, that something goes on and we get cut off from, but that's our potential. And it wakes up in our individual practices, so to speak. But for me, the real cellular realization of love is, because it's so interdependent, has to happen with each other in community and relationship. So I guess that's my prayer, that we stay humble and that we deepen our attention and that we do that together, really together, because it's not an individual problem and it's not an individual healing. That there's this kind of compassion that's radical that we can find, a courage and honesty that lets us be wise and kind in our response to the hurt in our world. So that's my prayer. May that be so.
Thank you, Tara. Thank you all. I can tell you that I've experienced this discourse on at least two levels. One on the level of the words and the ideas, concepts, questions that were raised and expressed, and the other on the energetic level. And it's on that level that I'm the most grateful, because I've really felt held by the energy of this group, and has made a difference for me. I'll show you a little item here. This is a bracelet, an indigenous bracelet from Haida Gwaii. I was given a few years ago, and the figure, I was told, means these words matter. And the words that we've all uttered here matter. Thank you all so much. Zoya Maurizio, time has gone totally non-linear here for me, so I don't know whether you want to answer questions now or where do you want to take this at this point, but thanks everybody. Zoya, I'm going to turn this back to you at this moment.
Thank you so much for this rich, beautiful, vast conversation. As we expected, we will just begin. This is just the opening, and many people have asked to continue. We will be listening and seeing if there's more space and time to unfold this conversation.
Thank you, Dan, and goodbye, everyone. Thanks again.
Thank you, everyone. Deep
Thank you.
gratitude
Thank you.
for
Thank
so
you.
much,
Thank you.
so much you shared with grace and wisdom and humility. Thank you.